Introduction: The Whispering Winds of Fantasia. Once upon a time, in a realm not bounded by map or clock, there existed a world called Fantasia. It was a place made entirely out of the pieces of human dreams, forgotten poems, and the wild thoughts children have just before they fall asleep. In Fantasia, mountains were made of blue glass that sang when the wind blew, and rivers flowed with liquid light instead of water. The trees did not just grow leaves, they grew stories. If you sat quietly beneath a great willow, you could hear the adventure of a night or the soft lullaby of a star. Every creature, from the tiniest silver snail to the grandest luck dragon, lived because someone in the human world believed in them. But Fantasia was changing. A quiet, chilly wind had begun to blow from the edges of the horizon. It did not carry the scent of rain or winter. It carried the scent of absolutely nothing. The Empress of Fantasia, who lived in the ivory tower, knew that a great sickness had come upon her land. The sickness was not a virus or a war. It was a shadow that wasn't even a shadow. It was an absence. And to save her world, she called upon a young hunter from the grassy ocean. His name was Atreyu. He was not a prince, and he carried no magical sword. He had only his courage, his purple buffalo cloak, and an open heart. Atreyu stood before the golden gates of the ivory tower, looking out at the beautiful landscape. But even from the high towers, he could see distant patches of gray where the vibrant colors of Fantasia had vanished. The luck dragon, Falcor, flew down from the pink clouds, his pearly scales glistening in the sunlight. Falcor looked at Atreyu with eyes full of ancient wisdom and a touch of sorrow. The journey ahead was not going to be a battle against a dragon or a wicked king. It was a journey into the great unknown space where things simply ceased to be. Atreyu mounted Falcor, and together they soared into the sky, chasing the cold wind toward the place where the world was disappearing. Chapter 1: The Edge of the Border. They flew for days over countries that were losing their names. They passed the singing mountains, but the mountains were no longer singing. They were humming a low, flat tune. They passed the Lake of Tears, which had dried up into a gray desert of salt. As Atreyu looked down, he noticed that the land beneath them was starting to look like a book whose ink had been washed away by rain. There were no trees, no rocks, no grass, just a blank, open space that made his eyes hurt if he looked at it for too long. It was the border of Fantasia, where the world met the void. Falcor landed gently on a high cliff of black stone. The stone felt cold, as if it had never been touched by the sun. Ahead of them lay a great cliff, and below it, there was nothing. It was not black like a dark room, and it was not white like a blank sheet of paper. It was an emptiness that pulled at Atreyu's mind. When he looked into it, he felt a strange urge to stop thinking, to stop caring, and to just close his eyes. It was a vacuum that wanted to swallow everything that had a shape, a color, or a voice. Atreyu walked to the very edge of the black stone. He picked up a small pebble and dropped it over the side. He waited for the sound of it hitting the bottom. He waited for a second, then a minute, then 5 minutes. There was no sound. The pebble did not land. It did not smash. It simply became nothing the moment it crossed the invisible line. Falcor crept up behind Atreyu, his warm breath keeping the cold air away. "This is the nothing," Atreyu whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "It is not an enemy we can shoot with an arrow. How do we fight something that isn't there?" Chapter 2: The Nature of the Void. As they sat on the cliff, a strange creature crawled out from a nearby cave. It was an old Gmork, a wolf like being made of shadows, but he looked tired and small, his fur grayed by the dust of the vacuum. Gmork did not growl at Atreyu. He merely lay down on the cold stone, looking into the empty space. "You cannot fight it, boy," Gmork said, his voice sounding like dry leaves scraping across a stone floor. "The nothing is the result of the world beyond this one. The humans have stopped dreaming. They have stopped believing in impossible things. They look only at what is real, what can be bought, and what can be counted. Gmork explained that when a human child says that magic is silly, a forest in Fantasia disappears. When an adult forgets how to hope, a river dries up. The nothing is the vacuum created by the loss of human imagination. It is the emptiness left behind when people stop looking at the stars and start looking only at their own feet. It is an infection of the spirit. It makes people believe that their lives have no meaning, that beauty is an illusion, and that love is just a chemical trick. Once the nothing takes over Fantasia, it will cross the border and take over the human world too, turning every heart into a cold, gray stone. Atreyu listened, feeling a heavy weight settle in his stomach. He looked at his hands, then at Falker's beautiful scales. He realized that they were all made of the very stuff that the humans were forgetting. If the humans forgot completely, Falker would disappear into thin air, and Atreyu would become a forgotten thought. "But I am real," Atreyu said, striking his chest. "I can feel the wind. I can see you." Gmork chuckled darkly. "You are real as long as the story continues, boy. But the book is closing. The pages are turning gray. If you want to stop the vacuum, you must find the keys to open the human heart again." Chapter 3. The Mirror of the Mind. Atreyu knew he needed advice from someone wiser than himself. He told Falker to fly toward the ancient mountains of grief, where Morla, the giant turtle, lived. Morla was as big as an island, and she had lived since the first dream was born. When they arrived, the mountain where Morla slept was already surrounded by the gray mist of the nothing. The edges of her shell were starting to dissolve into smoke. Atreyu climbed onto her mossy head and called out her name until her huge, heavy eyelids slowly opened. "Morla," Atreyu cried, "you must help me. The nothing is swallowing everything. It has reached your mountains. How do we stop the vacuum?" Morla sighed, a sound that shook the trees around them. "Why should we care?" she mumbled. "Everything passes anyway. The nothing is just the world returning to its natural state. Before there was Fantasia, there was nothing. It is easier to let it take us. Fighting takes too much energy, and in the end, it doesn't matter." Atreyu refused to accept her words. He saw that Morla was not being attacked by a physical force. She was being attacked by the thought of hopelessness. The nothing had entered her mind before it touched her shell. "It matters to me," Atreyu said loudly. "It matters to the children who dream of us. If you give up, you are helping the vacuum grow. Tell me the first key to fighting it." Morla blinked slowly, looking at the young boy's fierce determination. "The first key," she whispered, "is the mirror of awareness. You cannot fight the vacuum until you recognize that the vacuum is inside your own thoughts. You must see the emptiness before you can fill it." Chapter 4. The first key, radical awareness. Atreyu thanked Morla and climbed back onto Falker. As they flew away, he pondered her words. The mirror of awareness. He realized that the nothing grew because people pretended it wasn't there. They ignored the cold wind. They ignored the fact that their lives were becoming gray and repetitive. They filled their days with endless rushing and noise just so they wouldn't have to look at the emptiness inside their own souls. They used distractions to hide from the vacuum. The first key to fighting the nothing is to stop running from it. You must stand at the edge of the cliff, just as Atreyu did, and say, "I see the emptiness. I see the places where I have stopped hoping. I see the moments where I have allowed bitterness to take over my joy." By naming the vacuum, you take away its secrecy. The nothing thrives in the dark corners of the mind where people are afraid to look. When you bring it into the light of absolute honesty, it loses its power to control you. Atreyu practiced this right there on Falker's back. He allowed himself to feel the fear of disappearing. He allowed himself to feel the sorrow of seeing Fantasia dissolve. And as he accepted those feelings instead of pushing them away, something remarkable happened. The cold air around him became a little warmer. The gray mist below them seemed to hesitate. By being fully aware of the danger, Atreyu's mind became sharp and focused. He was no longer a victim of the shadow. He was a warrior who knew exactly what he was up against. Chapter 5. The Valley of Whispering Doubts. Their journey took them into the Valley of Whispering Doubts. This was a canyon where the walls were made of black obsidian mirror glass. As Falker flew through the narrow pass, the wind began to sound like voices. The voices were soft, gentle, and deeply persuasive. They did not shout insults. They whispered reasonable arguments. They said, "Atreyu, you are just a boy. You have no magic. You cannot save a whole world. Why are you trying so hard? It is foolish to believe you can make a difference. The world is too big, and you are too small." Atreyu tried to cover his ears, but the voices did not come from the outside. They echoed inside his own head. He looked down and saw his reflection in the obsidian walls. In the mirror, he did not look like a brave hunter. He looked small, tired, and dirty. His cloak was torn, and his eyes looked full of fear. The voices whispered again, "See, you are nothing. Your efforts are nothing. Just let go. It is much easier to give up and let the emptiness take you." Falker began to lose altitude, his grand wings flapping slowly as if they had become made of lead. The luck dragon's long white fur began to lose its shine. Atreyu realized that the Valley of Doubts was a trap designed by the Nothing to drain their energy before they could find the second key. The vacuum did not need to attack them with weapons. It just needed to convince them that they were worthless. If they believed the lie of their own insignificance, the vacuum would open up right beneath them and swallow them whole. Chapter 6. The Second Key, the Anchor of Worth. Atreyu stood up on Falker's back, balancing against the cold wind. He closed his eyes to shut out the twisted reflections in the obsidian mirrors. He remembered the children in the human world who had read about hunters in the grassy ocean. He remembered that his value did not depend on whether he succeeded or failed. His value came from the fact that he was alive, that he was capable of love, and that he had chosen to stand for what was beautiful. "No," Atreyu shouted into the canyon. "I am not nothing. I am Atreyu. I am the voice of the grassy ocean. I am the hope of the ivory tower. And even if I am small, a single spark can set a whole forest on fire." As he spoke his truth, his heart began to beat with a warm, golden rhythm. The Orin amulet around his neck, the symbol of the Empress's power, began to glow with a brilliant, blinding light. The light struck the obsidian walls, shattering the dark mirrors into a million harmless pieces. The voices of doubt turned into screams of wind and then vanished into silence. Falker roared with joy, his wings catching a sudden warm updraft. His scales flashed like diamonds in the new light. The second key to fighting the nothing had been discovered. It is the anchor of worth. You must know, with absolute certainty, that you matter. The vacuum wants you to believe you are an insignificant accident of the universe. To fight it, you must declare your own divine value. You must know that your life is a story worth telling, and that you have a specific place in the grand design of reality. Chapter 7. The City of the Forgetful. They flew out of the canyon and reached a strange settlement called the City of the Forgetful. The buildings here were perfectly square, made of gray concrete with no windows and no decorations. The streets were clean, but there were no flowers, no paintings, and no music. The people who lived there walked in straight lines, their heads bowed, looking down at the gray pavement. They wore identical clothes, and their faces showed no emotion, neither sadness nor joy. It was a city completely untouched by the outer beauty of Fantasia. Atreyu landed Falker in the central square and approached a man who was sitting on a bench, staring blankly at his own hands. "Excuse me," Atreyu said. "Can you tell me where the nothing is?" The man did not look up. "I don't know what you are talking about," he said in a flat, monotone voice. "Everything is fine here. We have our work. We have our schedules. We do the same things every day, and we do not think about silly things like stories or clouds. We are safe here." Atreyu realized with horror that the nothing had already conquered this city, but it had done so invisibly. It had not erased the physical buildings. It had erased the people's souls. It had taken away their curiosity, their passion, and their creativity. The people were alive, but they were empty vessels. They had traded their wonder for a false sense of security. They had allowed the vacuum to swallow their inner lives so they wouldn't have to face the unpredictability of dreaming. This was the most dangerous form of the nothing, the evil of total indifference. Chapter 8. The third key, the fire of creation. Atreyu knew he had to wake them up. He reached into his leather pouch and pulled out a small, dried flower that he had plucked from the singing mountains before they went silent. It was a small thing, but it still held a tiny drop of the light river within its petals. He held it out to the man on the bench. "Look at this," Atreyu said. "Remember the color of the sky before the gray came. Remember the songs your mother sang to you when you were a child." The man looked at the flower. For a long moment, nothing happened. But then, a small tremor shook his hands. A single tear formed in the corner of his eye and fell onto the dry stone. As the tear hit the ground, a tiny green shoot of grass burst through the gray concrete. The man blinked, as if waking up from a deep, centuries-long sleep. "I remember," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "I remember when the mountains used to sing. I remember how it felt to paint a picture." The moment the man allowed himself to feel and to create a memory, the gray walls of the nearest building began to crack, revealing a brilliant mosaic of gold and blue beneath the concrete. The third key was revealed, the fire of creation. You cannot defeat the vacuum by just standing there and being brave. You must actively fill the empty space with something beautiful. You must write a poem, sing a song, build a garden, or tell a story. Creation is the ultimate antidote to destruction. When you create, you are pouring life into the vacuum, forcing the nothing to retreat. Chapter 9. The Swamp of Despair. To find the final key, Atreyu and Falker had to cross the swamps of sadness. This was a dark, muddy marshland where the water was thick and black. The air here was heavy with the smell of old sighs and unfulfilled promises. The swamp had a powerful gravitational pull that did not pull at the body, but at the spirit. Every step you took in the mud made you feel a little heavier, a little older, and a little more tired. It was the place where dreams came to die when they were abandoned by their creators. As Falker flew over the swamp, the thick black fog began to wrap around his long body. Atreyu felt a deep, overwhelming sadness settle over his heart. He thought of all the beautiful parts of Fantasia that had already been lost to the nothing. He thought of his horse, Artax, who had been swallowed by this very mud in an older story. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his chest. What is the point of fighting? A voice inside him wept. The nothing is too big. Even if we save this one city, the rest of the world is still disappearing. We are just delaying the inevitable end. Falker groaned, his grand head sinking lower and lower until his claws were dragging through the black slime of the marsh. Atreyu felt himself slipping from the luck dragon's back. The mud seemed to be reaching up with invisible hands, inviting him to come down, to lay his head in the dark water, and to finally stop struggling. The swamp was the ultimate weapon of the vacuum. It used the natural sadness of life to paralyze the warrior. If you stop moving in the swamp, you become part of the mud. Chapter 10. The fourth key, radical interconnectedness. Atreyu was sinking into the mud. He could feel the cold slime rising around his chest. He looked at Falker, who was lying nearby, his white fur stained with black grease, his eyes closed. Atreyu knew that if he gave up now, Falker would die here, and the last light of Fantasia would go out. He realized that he couldn't find the strength to save himself just for his own sake. His personal survival didn't feel like enough of a reason to fight the heavy mud. Then, Atreyu reached out his hand and touched Falker's snout. He felt the faint, warm heartbeat of his friend. He thought of the childlike empress waiting in the ivory tower. He thought of the unknown human child in the distant world who was currently reading this very page, holding their breath, hoping that Atreyu would stand up. He realized that he was not alone. His story was connected to Falker's story, which was connected to the Empress's story, which was connected to the child's life. He was a thread in a magnificent, universal tapestry. If I give up, Atreyu thought, I am not just letting myself die. I am abandoning everyone who loves me and everyone who relies on my light. The fourth and final key blazed into his mind: radical interconnectedness. You do not fight the vacuum alone. You fight it by remembering your connection to others. Love is the ultimate gravity that counters the pull of the void. When you realize that your light belongs to the world, you find a supernatural strength that does not come from your own small ego. It comes from the entire universe flowing through you. With a loud cry that echoed across the dark swamp, Atreyu pulled himself out of the mud. He grabbed Falker's mane and channeled all his golden energy into his friend. Falker's eyes flew open, blazing with brilliant ruby light. The luck dragon let out a magnificent, thunderous roar that shook the swamp to its foundations. The black mud began to transform into clean, clear water, and thousands of white lilies burst into bloom across the marshland. They had conquered the swamp not by denying the sadness, but by using love to pull each other through it. Chapter 11. The Turning of the Tide. Atreyu and Falker rose high into the sky, leaving the transformed swamp behind. They were no longer afraid of the nothing. They had found the four keys: radical awareness, the anchor of worth, the fire of creation, and radical interconnectedness. They flew back toward the great cliff at the border of Fantasia, where the vast vacuum was still waiting. But this time, they did not look like victims. They looked like kings returning to their throne. As they stood on the black cliff once more, looking into the great emptiness, Atreyu took off the Orin amulet and held it high above his head. The light from the amulet was no longer just a small golden spark. It was a roaring bonfire of color. It held the blue of the singing mountains, the green of the grassy ocean, the silver of the luck dragon's scales, and the warm red of a human tear. Atreyu looked into the vacuum and shouted, I see you, emptiness. But you are only an empty space waiting to be filled, and we are the ones who bring the light. Falker joined his voice to Atreyu's, creating a beautiful harmony of sound that traveled deep into the void. The light from the amulet shot forward like a cosmic arrow, piercing the very heart of the nothing. Where the light touched the empty space, new stars began to explode into existence. New islands of green grass formed in the air. The vacuum was not destroyed by a weapon. It was undone because light had moved back into the space where it had been missing. The borders of Fantasia began to expand outward, reclaiming the lost lands with a fierce, unstoppable beauty. Chapter 12. The Message to the Reader. In that very moment, across the boundaries of reality, a human child sat in a room with a book in their lap. The room was dark, and the world outside was full of noises, schedules, and gray concrete buildings. The child had been feeling lonely, wondering if anyone in the world truly understood the wild, beautiful thoughts that lived inside their head. They had been feeling the cold wind of the nothing blowing through their own daily life. But as the child read the final words of Atreyu's journey, they felt a sudden warmth in their chest. They realized that Fantasia was not a faraway land in a book. It was the space inside their own mind. They realized that they were the creator of Atreyu, the protector of Falker, and the savior of the ivory tower. The child closed the book, walked over to the window, and looked up at the night sky. For the first time in a very long time, they did not just see rocks and gas. They saw a playground of infinite possibilities. The child picked up a pencil and a blank piece of paper. They began to draw a picture of a luck dragon flying through pink clouds. And as the pencil moved across the paper, far away in the realm of Fantasia, Falker let out a joyful roar, and a new forest of golden trees began to grow. The vacuum was gone. The story was alive again. and it would remain alive as long as there was a single soul brave enough to look into the dark, remember their worth, create beauty, and choose to love. Conclusion: the eternal return. My dear traveler, whether you are 7 years old or 70, the story of Atreyu is your story. The Nothing is not an ancient legend. It is the daily challenge of living in a world that often forgets how to wonder. Whenever you feel overwhelmed by the grayness of life, whenever the voices of doubt tell you that you are insignificant, remember the 4 keys that you carry within your own heart. You are the author of the reality around you. You are the vessel through which beauty enters the world. Do not be afraid of the empty spaces you encounter. Do not run from the vacuums of life. Stand firmly at the edge of the cliff. Breathe in the deep peace of your true identity, and let your light shine into the dark. The universe is waiting for your story. The trees of Fantasia are waiting for your dreams to give them leaves. Walk forward with courage. Take care of your inner garden, and never forget that you are connected to the great, beautiful symphony of existence. Go forth and create, and let the shadows melt away before your brilliant fire. Peace and wonder be with you on your journey.